Lions series is done and dusted, folks, but were the Lions the better team? I've got some stats for you. You know I like to look at the stats. We're going to have a look at the stats from the 3 games combined to get a feel for where were the Wallabies better than the Lions? Where were the Lions better than the Wallabies? For mine, there is one absolutely key stat which separates the sides, but there's a bunch that are very, very even. We'll go through them. You guys can let us know your thoughts on the series and on the teams overall. Obviously, if you just want to look at the wins, 2 wins to 1 means the Lions were definitely a better team than the Wallabies. Game 3 certainly had a different feel about it. The Wallabies definitely seemed the more motivated of the 2 sides. Certainly, you have to ask the question, if the Wallabies had won Game 2, would the Lions have been different in Game 3? Maybe, we'll never know. But from what we've got, Game 3 certainly seems like a bit of an outlier from a Lions perspective. But I mean, the win's 2-1. The score, 68-67. 1 point in it across the 3 games. Tries, 10-9. 1 try in it across the 3 games. Run meters, 1,064 to 1,001. Only 64 meters difference, or 63 meters difference across 3 games. It's crazy. So there's many areas where the Lions have just kind of edged it, but there's not much at all between the sides. Where were the Wallabies good? Because we do need to give them a fair bit of credit. They were certainly a lot more accurate than the Lions. They didn't make as many knock-ons. They didn't cough up as much ball generally compared to the Lions. And even their set-piece numbers come in as more accurate. The exact numbers themselves, 26 Lions knock-ons to 17 by the Wallabies. That is a lot more. And especially when you consider the fact that the Wallabies actually had more possession than the Lions. The Lions, from their limited possession, still managed to cough up the ball a bit more. Sometimes I left myself wondering, man, if the Lions could just execute that a little bit better, they'd put a lot more points on, because they were getting good penetration of the Aussie defensive line. At times just to be let down by 1 or 2 kind of loose balls. But maybe that is just the nature of the Lions being a team which is brought together in a relatively quick fashion. They don't have the same chemistry and cohesion as some other sides. Certainly their execution at times let them down, whereas the Wallabies were a lot more accurate in that regard. Set piece accuracy, the Wallabies line out was 90%, the Lions 83%. The Lions' third game is certainly the big outlier where their line out percentage drops, but across the series, that's where the difference is. Scrum percentage 90 to 85. Again, the Lions have got the lower accuracy rate in terms of their set piece. I don't really think scrum numbers are that representative, but certainly I think Game 1 and Game 3, I feel like the Lions props conceded a bit more. And Game 2 was certainly a lot more dominant from the Lions, but yeah, there's some encouraging numbers for the Wallabies guys here ahead of the upcoming Rugby Championship, if they can, continue to be as accurate as they were and force other teams to make errors. Now, what about the Lions? They certainly had bad discipline in comparison to the Wallabies. They conceded 31 penalties to 26. Part of that makes sense because they had less ball. They had to do more defending. Teams defending tend to concede more penalties than teams attacking. But they also conceded 2 yellow cards to the Wallabies zip. So that was, again, another area that potentially keeps the series a bit closer. If the Lions were more accurate and less ill-disciplined at times, might they have put in bigger performances that might have brought a bit more of a smile to Andy Farrell's face? And, like Maro Toje's face after Game 1 showed that they didn't feel like they had done or met their potential compared to where the team's potential capabilities are at. But certainly the discipline numbers were not fantastic. But one area they were fantastic, and I feel like is for me, if you're going to highlight just one thing that is the biggest difference between the sides, because so many areas are so even, the key stat, it's the meters per carry. And I go on about this stat a lot because generally speaking, it is a pretty good basic measure of how offensively capable a team is. The gold standard is 4 meters a carry. If you are getting 4 meters a carry, I wouldn't quite say you're cutting teams to bits, but you're definitely getting very good across the advantage line, go forward ball. You can look at a team And you know, like when you look at that team, France, All Blacks, these teams are often ones that get really good numbers in this regard. You see them on the field, you look at that number, you're like, oh man, they're over 4 meters a carry. It absolutely makes sense. You look at Wales in recent years, it's been around 2. It's been just a struggle. You see them throwing waves of players and not really getting anywhere. It's not a universal standard like Ireland like to play really kind of multi-phase ball. They like to go through heaps of phases to get their go forward. So their meters of carry is often a bit lower, but the number of carries, number of phases they have is massive. So it's not a universal one, like I said, but it's a generally pretty good guideline. So with that being said, the Lions were at 3.6, and they would have been close to 4 if not for the third test. I mean, 3.9 in test 1, 4.0 in test 2. These are gold standard performances. This is, we're carrying past your defenders. We're able to get front football, and it shows. It definitely showed in game 1 and 2. Game 3 was 2.8, which brings the average down a bit. As I said, who knows what the Lions would have been doing if game 3 was a decider, but still, across the board, the Lions got good go-forward ball against the Wallabies. And the Lions' worst one, 2.8 in the third test, is not that much worse than the Wallabies' best one in test 2, which was 3.0. The Wallabies struggled in this area, 2.5. How many times did you see the Wallabies chucking wave after wave after wave at the Lions' defensive line, and they were just not able to make a dent? Like, Valentini only played 40 minutes. He's probably the Wallabies' best ball carrier in terms of ability to get across the advantage line. They lacked that at times. For me, that is the number one difference between the sides. The Lions just were able to make a dent in the Aussie defensive line. Not so much on the flip side. The Aussie defenders were often surrendering meters and then waiting for that Lions knock on, because, as I said, their accuracy wasn't as good, the Lions. But yeah, 3.6 to 2.5 doesn't sound like a heck of a lot, but trust me, it is a fairly big difference. I mean, the Lions' tackle percentage is higher. The Lions' total tackle amount is higher, so they were also defensively very sound. But yeah, their ability to force the Wallabies guys back, I feel like, was really, really noticeable in the 2 tests. Like, there's still some surprising numbers, like kicks from hand was almost identical. The Lions kicked slightly more as a overall percentage compared to the Wallabies, but like the Wallabies mauled it more than the Lions, which is maybe surprising, 10-7, but often the Lions weren't opting for mauls, right? They were quite happy to go 5-meter taps. So yeah, some interesting numbers. The series is done, but yeah, I think there's certainly some encouraging signs there for the Wallabies, and yeah, it really is a shame that that third test wasn't a decider, because I would have liked to seen how it would have gone. But hey, such is life. 2-1 to the Lions, better team overall, but not much in it between the two sides. And given that the Wallabies were predicted by many to get a hiding, I could look back on this channel for the last couple of years, really, saying that the Wallabies were going to get absolute hidings. The fact that it finished within a point across 3 games, maybe highlights. It wasn't quite as lopsided as all that. You guys, let us know your thoughts. What did you think of the 2 sides? Where were they particularly strong and weak across this series? Subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. If you want a Lions jersey, check out the Lions store down in the description. They'll be getting them on pretty heavy discount at this point, so use the link down there. Take care of yourselves, folks, and talk to you guys again soon. See you later.